The knock at midnight was not a sound I ever expected to hear. Not at my age. Not at my door. Most people my age are asleep by 10, wrapped in the quiet of a predictable life. But that night, a storm was rattling the windows, and beneath the sound of the rain came 3 slow, heavy knocks. I thought it was the wind at first, a branch maybe, but then they came again. Thud, thud, thud. A sound that seemed to come from the past itself. I shuffled to the door, my old robe tight around me, and peered through the cloudy glass of the sidelight. The porch light was out, but a flash of lightning lit up the yard, and in that sudden white burst, I saw him. A man, soaked to the bone, his face a mask of shadow and rain. My heart didn't leap, it froze. It stopped entirely, because after 20 years, I knew. Even before I turned the lock, even before the door creaked open and the cold, wet air rushed in, I knew it was my son. His name is Daniel. I haven't spoken that name out loud in a very, very long time. Saying it used to feel like a prayer. Then it felt like a wound. For 2 decades, it was just a silent, aching space in my heart. A space shaped like a boy of 18. The last time I saw him, he was standing right there in that doorway, but he was facing the other way. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, his jaw was set, hard and young, and so terribly sure of itself. We'd had a fight, the kind of fight that only happens when love and fear get all twisted up together. I was afraid for him. His dreams were so big, so wild, and our small town felt like it was crushing him. I said things I didn't mean. He said things he couldn't take back. And then he left. He just walked out. He said he was going to find a life that mattered. He said he would come back when he had something to show for it. I waited. Days turned into months, months into years. The first Christmas, I set a place for him. The 5th Christmas, I just cried. The 10th Christmas, I stopped talking about him altogether. The Daniel-shaped space in my life gathered dust. I learned to live around it. I went to work, I tended my garden, I had my routines. The pain didn't go away, it just changed shape. It became a quiet companion, a familiar sadness I carried with me, like a stone in my pocket. And now, here he was, standing on my welcome mat, water pooling at his feet. He was a man, not my boy. His face was lined, tired. His eyes, which used to sparkle with mischief, were dark and hollow. He didn't say hello. He didn't say, "Mom." He just looked at me, and in a voice cracked from exhaustion and the cold, he whispered, "I didn't know where else to go." I stepped back, wordlessly. He came in, a ghost from my past, dripping onto the linoleum. The familiar scent of rain and damp wool filled the hallway, but underneath it was something else. A smell of road dust, of endless travel, of loneliness. I got him a towel. I put the kettle on. We moved around my small kitchen like 2 strangers in a play, performing familiar actions. The silence between us was a living thing. It was filled with all the words we hadn't said for 20 years. 1,000 questions burned in my throat. Where have you been? Are you hurt? Are you sick? Why now? But I couldn't speak. I was afraid if I started, I would never stop. Or worse, I would start crying and not be able to look at him. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd done his homework. His large hands wrapped around the mug of tea I gave him, seeking warmth. He stared into the steam. "I'm sorry," he finally said, the words so soft they were almost swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator, "for coming like this, so late." "It's all right," I said, my own voice unfamiliar to me. It was the voice I used for telemarketers, polite and distant. This was my son, and I was using my telemarketer voice. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but it would have been a terrible broken sound. The conflict wasn't in loud words, it was in this crippling politeness, It was in the space between the chair he sat in and the chair where I stood, leaning against the counter. It was a canyon filled with lost time. He stayed. Days turned into a week. He slept in his old room, which I had long ago turned into a sewing room. He was quiet, helpful in a stiff, awkward way. He fixed the porch light, he weeded the garden, but he was a shadow in my house. He jumped at loud noises. He barely ate. He'd disappear for long walks and come back looking emptier than when he left. We talked about the weather. We talked about the old dog that had died. We talked about everything except the 20 years that stood between us. It was like trying to build a bridge with tissue paper. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon. He was in the shower. His phone, an old cracked thing, buzzed on the coffee table. It buzzed again and again. Then it rang. I didn't mean to look, but the screen lit up and the name that flashed there sent a cold shock through my entire body. It wasn't a name I knew. It was a single word: clinic. My mind raced. A medical clinic, a rehab clinic, every terrible possibility flashed before my eyes. When he came out, his hair wet, he saw me looking at his phone. He went very still. The fragile, polite world we'd built over the last week shattered. "It's not what you think," he said quickly, his voice tight. "I don't know what to think, Daniel," I said, and saying his name out loud felt like breaking a law. "You show up in the middle of the night, you don't tell me anything. What am I supposed to think? Are you in trouble?" He looked down, his shoulders slumping. All the strength seemed to drain out of him. "Yeah," he said, so quietly I'd barely heard it. "I'm in trouble." He didn't sit. He just started talking, the words pouring out of him like a flood that had been held back for decades. He talked about the early years, the chasing of dreams that turned into chasing jobs, the loneliness of cities, the bad choices, the debts. He talked about pride that turned to shame, a shame so heavy it kept him from picking up the phone. He said, "Every time I thought about calling, I heard your voice from our fight. I heard you saying I'd never make it. And I thought, you were right, so I couldn't come back until I'd made it. But I never did." And then he told me about the diagnosis. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't from the clinic that had called. That was just a callback for a job, he said. The real trouble was quieter, deeper, a weariness of the soul he couldn't outrun. A doctor had called it something else, a clinical name for a profound sadness that had followed him for years. "I'm so tired, Mom," he said. And for the first time, he sounded like my little boy again. "I'm just so tired of running from myself." That was the breaking point. Not a shout, but a confession. Not an accusation, but an admission of defeat. The boy who left to conquer the world had come home because the world, and his own heart, had conquered him. The truth wasn't a twist. It was a simple, devastating relief. He hadn't come home successful. He had come home broken. And in that brokenness, I finally saw my son again. The weeks that followed were different. The polite silence was gone, replaced by a hard, sometimes painful honesty. We started talking, real talking. We cried, a lot. I told him about my years of waiting, about the anger that had faded into a worry so constant it was like breathing. He told me stories of his life. Not the glossy success stories he'd imagined bringing home, but the real ones. The struggles, the small kindnesses from strangers, the moments of beauty in all the chaos. We found a therapist for him in town. He started going, reluctantly at first, then with a kind of grim determination. He got a simple job at a local hardware store. It was humble work, but he came home with his hands dirty and a flicker of purpose in his eyes. The debt was a mountain, but we faced it together, making a plan one small step at a time. It wasn't my money that solved it. It was the facing of it, together. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a daily practice. I had to forgive him for the 20 years of silence, and I realized I had to forgive myself. I had to forgive the younger me, The scared mother who said the wrong things in an argument, who let her fear sound like doubt. We were both to blame, and we were both innocent. Just two people who loved each other and got terribly lost. One evening, we were in the garden, pulling weeds side by side. The sun was warm on our backs. He stopped and looked at me, soil on his hands. "I'm not the son you deserved," he said. I looked at him, this man finding his way back to life from the roots up. "And I wasn't always the mother you needed," I replied. "But we're here now. That's all that matters." He's still here. He's healing. Some days are good. Some days the old shadows visit him and he's quiet again. But now I know the quiet. I know to just sit with him, to make a pot of tea, to wait for the storm in his heart to pass. That midnight knock didn't bring back my 18-year-old boy. That boy was gone, shaped by a world I never saw. But it brought me my son, a man I am getting to know for the first time, a man who was brave, not for leaving, but for coming back, for being humble enough to say, "I need help." The lesson I learned is this. Love doesn't keep a scorecard of years lost. It waits by the door, even at midnight, especially at midnight, hoping for a knock. It makes a pot of tea for ghosts. It learns to love the person who returns, not the memory of the one that left. Our story isn't about a triumphant return. It's about a gentle landing. It's about finding each other in the wreckage of our old expectations and building something new, something real from the pieces. The door is closed now against the night, the lamp is on, and for the first time in 20 years, the Daniel-shaped space in my home is not empty. It is filled with the quiet sound of a man breathing, safe, under his own roof again, and that is the only ending I ever really needed. If this story of a long-awaited return touched your heart, please share your thoughts or your own story of reunion in the comments below. For more real-life stories of family, forgiveness, and quiet hope, consider subscribing to Real Queens of Courage. Your support helps us bring these truthful narratives to light. Thank you for listening and for being part of our community.